Well, hello everyone. Max of Pilots and Prop Wash here, and I thought I would talk about something that was a little offbeat. I've been working on this 1/32nd scale model B-25J Mitchell with the gun nose on my other channel, Max's Models. And while doing research, I stumbled across several threads and videos and things about the B-25 Mitchell versus another medium bomber from World War II, the German Junkers 88. And both of them were very popular and extremely versatile medium bombers that wound up flying many different kinds of missions that they were never intended for. So I thought I would take a quick peek at the two of them, see their pros and cons. And I'm not going to say one's better than the other because both of them had their relative strengths. Now, the B-25 was not actually a clean sheet design. It was outgrowth of a previous medium bomber design that North American had played with that didn't really go anywhere. And the early B-25s had some pretty serious stability issues, particularly in gusty winds, because they had these long straight wings on them. And the engineers at North American pretty quickly figured out that if they were to gull the wing a little bit, the problems went away, and they did, and it became a great airplane. The JU-88, by comparison, the production models look a lot like the prototype. The changes were incremental, but both of them turned out to be extremely versatile airplanes. Now, different sources make different quotes, but apparently there are over a dozen versions of the B-25 with some reasonably significant differences, but they did all have that basic B-25 Mitchell look to them. And there was a follow-on design, the B-28, that came out actually during the war, which was sort of an upgraded pressurized B-25 for a higher altitude mission, which it never really went anywhere. It was a fine airplane, but it just wasn't really what they needed for the mission they had at hand, so they went with other types. I've seen some threads on forums where people talk about, oh, in a dogfight, the B-25 and the JU-80 would be this and they'd be that. And I'm kind of like, yeah, they're medium bombers. They're not really supposed to be dogfighting. And that never happened. So nobody really knows what the outcome of that would be. But there are so many factors involved with that. People love to say these things like these little technical issues of speed or altitude are going to make all the difference. But in reality, a lot of times in a dogfight, it's just see who sees who first and lands the first shots. But the same goes with tank battles and a lot of other things. There's so many variables involved, which kind of segues into the next thing. On paper, the JU-88 seems to have some real advantages. Could go a little bit higher, could go a little bit faster, had a little bit longer range. And in a vacuum, that would seem to be the three things that would make it the quote-unquote better airplane. But it's always more nuanced than that. JU-88 could carry 3,100 pounds of bombs, according to most of the sources I found, whereas the B-25 carried 3,000 pounds, but it had an emergency warload up to 4,000 pounds if you were willing to trade off a lot of fuel. However, the JU-88 rapidly starts losing the range and speed advantage when you start racking out those bombs on it because it carried its bombs externally, and that was a lot of parasite drag. The B-25 didn't suffer as badly because the bombs were internal in a bomb bay. So in certain configurations, the B-25 could actually fly farther, faster, and higher. There were a lot of other factors involved, such as the quality of fuel. Also, the B-25 had an air-cooled engine, and although the JU-88 looks like a radial engine, it's actually a liquid-cooled inline. Those circles around the engines giving it the round cowling are actually radiators. Some sources quote up to 40 different variants of the JU-88 versus about a dozen different variants of the B-25. And the JU-88 did some missions the B-25 never did, such as torpedo bomber and radar night fighter. But the Americans didn't need to convert the B-25 into something like a night fighter because they had dedicated aircraft like the P-61 Black Widow. By the way, just as a quick aside, the JU-88 was one of two airplanes that were tested at the same time. The other was the JU-85, which was basically the same airplane with a twin tail, but they went with a single tail variant, so the 85 never went into production. The B-25 also had a few advantages because of its larger, more cavernous fuselage. It could be used as a VIP transport or a high-priority cargo plane. And there are all kinds of missions it could do because of the larger internal space that the JU-88 just wasn't really going to be optimized for. But at the same time, when in something like the Night Fighter version, the JU-88 with its slender fuselage would actually be faster and fly higher. And this was critical if it was going to intercept enemy aircraft. So each of them carried a few advantages, but those advantages jockeyed back and forth depending on weight and configuration. Both of them had 75 millimeter guns at one point, but in the case of the B-25, it became a fairly common version, whereas I don't think the Germans ever had more than 50 or 100 aircraft with the large caliber guns. They tried several versions of the P model with 75 millimeters, then 50 millimeters, and then even twin 37 millimeters. And they had some limited success, but they never caught on. Cannons aside, when it comes to the firepower, the B-25 had the distinct advantage. It bristled with 50 caliber machine guns with as many as 12 forward firing 50 calibers on the gun nose models. The JU-88 had mostly rifle caliber machine guns and some occasional 13 millimeter guns, but it wasn't even close. Both airplanes saw use after the war, with the B-25 being used largely as both a navigator trainer, the TB-25, and as a VIP transport. The French used a small number of JU-88s after the war, but by 1951 they were all done flying. The JU-88s did see some foreign service, as I mentioned with the French, also the Romanians and some others, but the B-25 was used by virtually every ally, and the last military B-25 wasn't retired to the mid-1970s in Indonesia, though hopelessly outdated by that point. It was fighting enemies that were equally outdated. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, most of the combat they saw was during an actual uprising in Indonesia, so they were kind of fighting their own forces. There are quite a few B-25s still flying, and they are treasures today. The only JU-88s I know of that still exist are in museums. I don't think any are flying. The one I saw was in the Museum of the United States Air Force in Romanian markings, and it's an impressive airplane. Both of them were essentially pre-war designs that served throughout the entire war and after. The JU-88 was intended to be a single-pilot airplane, whereas the B-25 could be operated single-pilot, but was intended to have a two-pilot crew, and in combat, I think that's an advantage. The JU-88 was also produced in much larger numbers than the B-25, with over 15,000 being built, versus just under 10,000 B-25s being built. But then the JU-88 was one of the aircraft that made the backbone of the German Luftwaffe, whereas the B-25 was one of a host of medium bombers and attack aircraft made by the Americans. So they're a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, but when you do compare them right next to each other, they both come up with relative advantages. If I was going to crew one of the aircraft, I think I'd want to be in the B-25. It was better armed and had two pilots. And I suspect maybe a little more comfortable. But I don't want to take anything away from the JU-88. Both aircraft were used as medium bombers, ground strafers, reconnaissance aircraft, with the B-25 being the F-10 model. And they were both basically jack-of-all-trades aircraft. So when people say which one is better, I don't really think that's a proper comparison. They shared a lot of similarities, being versatile multi-engine medium bombers, but they were different airplanes with different ideas. The B-25 was largely intended for the Pacific theater, where range was really important and it didn't have to go to high altitudes, whereas the JU-88 was very much made for North Africa and Europe, and they both thrived. Both of them were known as being good handling aircraft that were incredibly versatile. In fact, there wasn't much you couldn't do with them. The Junkers 88 was the basis for several other aircraft that were follow-ons, such as the 188 and the 288, all of which continued to expand its capabilities, whereas the Americans, with a substantially larger industrial base, preferred simply to go with newer designs. I think this is more of a reflection of the industrial bases of the two countries than anything else. But I would be remiss if I did not point out some of the incredible aircraft that the Junkers 88 evolved into. So when they say which one was better, my answer is yes. I'm Max Pilots and Prop Wash. Take care.